What happens when a privileged teenager falsely accuses a black man of a crime? What if the man she tries to destroy isn't just anyone, but the Attorney General of Texas? When Madeline Carter gets caught drunk driving, she turns the truth into a lie, knowing her powerful mother will protect her. But this time, she picked the wrong target. Will justice prevail, or will power win again? Watch till the end to find out. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The night stretched long over the quiet Houston suburbs, the kind of stillness that came only in the late hours when the world had settled into sleep. The city's distant skyline glowed against the dark sky, flickering like a restless heartbeat. Streetlights lined the empty roads, their dim halos casting elongated shadows onto the pavement. Inside his black Cadillac Escalade, Marcus Reed exhaled deeply, rolling his shoulders in an attempt to shake off the exhaustion pressing down on him. It had been a long day, the kind that made a man question whether fighting for justice was even worth it. Being the Attorney General of Texas wasn't a job that ended when he walked out of the office. Justice never slept, and neither did the people trying to twist it to their advantage. His mind still churned with the events of the day. New corruption allegations surfacing within the Houston Police Department, another case of evidence mysteriously disappearing, a high-profile trial where the weight of money threatened to crush the scales of justice. Same fight, different day. His fingers rested firmly on the leather steering wheel as he navigated through the quiet streets. He wasn't far from home now. A few more turns, maybe 10 more minutes of silence before he could pour himself a drink, kick off his shoes and pretend, even if just for a moment, that the world outside his door didn't exist. But then, a blur, a flash of white, sudden, reckless, and dangerous. A Range Rover came barreling down the road, blowing past him like a bullet. Marcus's heart kicked up a beat as his gaze snapped to the rearview mirror. The SUV was moving far too fast for a residential area, and then a pedestrian. Marcus barely had time to process what was happening before he saw them, a figure in the crosswalk, frozen like a deer in headlights. The Range Rover didn't slow down, didn't swerve, didn't even hesitate. The pedestrian, a woman young, maybe early 20s, threw herself backward at the last second, tumbling onto the sidewalk, her arms flailing as she landed hard. The SUV roared past as if nothing had happened. Marcus's hands clenched into fists against the wheel, his jaw tightening with something cold, something familiar. Anger, frustration, the sickening déjà vu of seeing someone treat the world like their personal playground, untouchable above consequence. He had seen too many cases like this, privileged drivers getting away with reckless behavior, leaving behind shattered lives while their parents pulled the right strings, called the right people, and made it all disappear. Marcus knew this game too well. His first instinct, let it go. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't on duty. He had no badge to flash, no patrol lights to flicker in their rearview mirror. But then he thought about the woman on the sidewalk, shaking, staring after the SUV with wide, terrified eyes. And that was it. Marcus pressed his foot against the gas, not chasing, just following. For the next 2 miles, he kept his distance, watching the SUV closely, not wanting to spook the driver into doing something even dumber. The road was mostly empty now, the silence of the late hour making the roar of the engine seem even louder as the Range Rover continued its reckless path. Then, suddenly, the SUV jerked sharply to the right, its tires screeching against the pavement. A gas station. Marcus slowed his own vehicle, pulling into the far end of the lot, out of direct view. The station was old, the kind that had been around long before the new developments started swallowing up the neighborhood. The neon "Open 24 Hours" sign buzzed weakly, flickering against the dark. The pumps stood like tired sentinels, their paint chipped, their screens dull and greasy from years of use. Inside the small convenience store, a cashier leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to what had just happened outside. A single customer browsed the shelves, unaware. Marcus's attention snapped back to the Range Rover just as the driver's door swung open. A girl stepped out. Young, blonde, barely 16 if he had to guess. She stumbled as she moved, her legs wobbling under her as she made her way toward the gas pump. She reached out, missed the handle on the first try, then grabbed onto it for balance. Marcus didn't need a sobriety test to know she was drunk. His lips pressed into a thin line. He let out a slow breath, his instincts at war with his exhaustion. This wasn't his fight. He could just stay in his car, let it go. But then she let out a soft giggle, swaying as she leaned against the pump, her carelessness almost surreal. And Marcus knew this wasn't about authority or making a point. This was about stopping a disaster before it happened. He pushed open his car door and stepped out. The air hit him like a wall, thick, humid, carrying the unmistakable stench of alcohol. She didn't notice him at first. She was too busy fumbling with the gas nozzle, her fingers sluggish, her mind clearly lagging behind her own actions. But then she felt his presence. She turned her head, her glazed eyes locking onto him. For a split second, there was confusion. Then her lips curled into a smirk. "Oh my God," she slurred, dragging out the words like each syllable required effort. She let out a breathy laugh, tilting her head like she had just spotted a stray dog wandering too close. Marcus didn't react. He had been in enough courtrooms to know people like her. He kept his voice calm. "You've been drinking," he said. "And you're underage. You can't drive." She scoffed, rolling her eyes with exaggerated dramatics. "Wow, what an observation. What are you, some kind of hall monitor?" Marcus stayed steady. "I'm stopping you because you're a danger to yourself and everyone else on this road. You need to call someone to pick you up." She laughed again, louder this time, mocking. "Oh, that is so cute. You think you can tell me what to do?" She leaned in slightly, her expression dripping with smug amusement. Then her voice lowered, turning sharp. "Let me explain something to you, old man. I don't take orders from people like you." Marcus felt the shift in the air, the subtle but unmistakable weight behind her words, and suddenly he knew. This wasn't just a drunk teenager. This was something worse. And before the night was over, he was going to find out exactly how bad it could get. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of Houston's late-night traffic, the soft buzz of the gas station's fluorescent lights, and the quiet shuffle of Marcus's footsteps on the cracked pavement. The air was thick with the lingering warmth of the day, but beneath it, there was something colder, a tension he couldn't quite shake. Madeline Carter barely acknowledged his approach at first. Her long blonde hair was disheveled, her designer crop top slightly askew, and her jeans, though expensive, were stained with what looked like spilled liquor. She smelled like a bar floor at closing time, cheap vodka, stale beer, and bad decisions. She swayed slightly, gripping the gas pump like a lifeline as she tried, and failed, to insert her credit card into the machine. It took her 3 tries. Marcus didn't need to get any closer to know she was beyond drunk. "Young lady," he said evenly, standing a safe distance away, "you've been drinking. You can't drive." She let out an exaggerated sigh, like she was bored out of her mind, before turning her unfocused eyes toward him. "Wow." Her voice was slow and mocking, dragging out the syllables. "What are you, a cop? Or just some guy who likes sticking his nose where it doesn't belong?" Marcus met her gaze, unreadable, unaffected. He had spent years in courtrooms, facing men and women far more dangerous than a drunken teenager with a sharp tongue. "I'm stopping you from making a terrible mistake." His tone remained calm. Call someone to pick you up." For a brief second, something flickered across her face, something darker than arrogance, sharper than defiance. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. Then, as if flipping a switch, her entire demeanor changed. Her posture stiffened. Her wide, unfocused eyes suddenly brimmed with something that looked an awful lot like terror. And then she screamed. "Help, he's touching me!" The words sliced through the quiet night like a knife. The gas station went silent. Marcus froze. From inside the convenience store, the cashier's head jerked up. A woman browsing the snack aisle turned sharply, eyes widening. A man at the next pump, a white guy in a trucker hat, immediately pulled out his phone. Marcus didn't move, didn't even blink. He had seen this before, in courtrooms, in false testimonies, in cases where a single cry from the right kind of person could twist reality into whatever story they wanted. And now, it was happening in real time. Madeline stumbled backward, clutching her arms, panting as if she had just fought off an attacker. Her breath hitched perfectly, a tremor running through her delicate frame. But it wasn't real, it was a performance, and the audience was already buying tickets. "Oh my God," she gasped, her voice quivering. He tried to grab me. He wouldn't let me go." Every pair of eyes in the gas station lot locked onto Marcus. A black man, tall, strong, standing in the middle of it all, and a young, blonde, white girl crying. Marcus exhaled slowly, steady, controlled, measured. He wasn't afraid, but he knew exactly what was about to happen. Madeline reached for her phone, fingers shaking so perfectly that it almost looked rehearsed. "Mom," she sobbed, "please come quick. There's this scary black man. He tried to touch me. I'm so scared." The word black was deliberate. She said it with weight, with precision, with the knowledge that it carried more power than any other part of her lie. And just like that, the shift happened. The gas station patrons, who just moments ago had been indifferent strangers, were no longer neutral. The trucker by the next pump took a step forward, his face tightening with suspicion. The woman near the snack aisle whispered something to her husband. Inside the store, the cashier's hand hovered over the store's landline. The doubt had vanished. The narrative had settled. Marcus could see it happening, the unspoken understanding passing between them. They didn't see Madeline, drunk and reckless, nearly killing someone minutes ago. They didn't see Marcus, the Attorney General of Texas, simply trying to prevent a tragedy. They saw what Madeline wanted them to see: a helpless white girl, a dangerous black man. And the worst part, they didn't even question it. "She's just a kid, man." The trucker's voice was sharp, accusing. Marcus turned his head, locking eyes with him. "She's a kid who was about to drive drunk," Marcus said evenly. "I stopped her. That's all that happened." The man scoffed, shaking his head. "Then why is she crying like that?" Before Marcus could respond, a sound cut through the humid air: sirens. The flashing red and blue lights reflected against the cracked pavement, casting jagged shadows across the gas station lot. The police were coming. And before they even arrived, Marcus already knew what they would see. A trembling, underage white girl, looking fragile, terrified, in need of protection, and a black man, a suspect. He was outnumbered, outstoried. And if history had proven anything, sometimes the truth didn't matter. Marcus exhaled slowly, keeping his stance relaxed, his breathing steady. He had handled worse. He had argued against corrupt judges, gone toe-to-toe with billionaires, taken on entire institutions that thought they were untouchable. But this was different, because this time he wasn't fighting in a courtroom. He was inside the machine itself, and the machine was about to decide his fate. The sirens grew louder, their wailing cutting through the thick, humid night. The gas station, which had moments ago been nothing more than a quiet stop along an empty road, now felt like the center of a brewing storm. The black Chevy Suburban roared into the lot, its tires screeching against the pavement as it skidded to a stop. Marcus didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. The door swung open sharply and out stepped Amanda Carter, Houston's chief of police. She was tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in her crisp navy blue uniform, her polished badge gleaming under the fluorescent gas station lights. She carried herself the way people in power always did, like nothing could touch her, like the law bent to her will, not the other way around. Her gaze swept the lot with calculated precision, her eyes already locking onto her daughter before moving to Marcus. And then, the moment their gazes met, he recognized what this was. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an attempt to figure out the truth. This was retaliation. "Mom," Madeline whimpered, running toward her mother like a scared child. She clung to Amanda's sleeve, her whole body trembling with practiced fragility. Marcus almost admired the performance. Almost. "Are you okay, baby?" Amanda's voice was full of concern, but her eyes never left Marcus. He tried to grab me," Madeline gasped, her voice breaking just enough. I told him to leave me alone, but he wouldn't let me go." Amanda's expression darkened. Her jaw tightened. She turned back to Marcus. "Arrest him." No hesitation, no questions, no demand for evidence. Just two words that carried the weight of her unchecked authority. One of the officers, a younger man with a hardened face and stiff posture, immediately stepped forward. He didn't ask Marcus to explain. He didn't pause to assess the situation. He simply reached for his handcuffs. Marcus exhaled slowly. He had seen this before. He had seen how quickly perception could turn truth into fiction, how fast people in power could manipulate a situation to serve their own agenda. He didn't resist, didn't struggle, because he knew exactly how this worked. He let them yank his arms behind his back, the cold steel biting into his wrists as the cuffs locked into place. The pressure was familiar, too familiar. The officer patted him down, rough but not violent. He wasn't trying to hurt Marcus. He was just going through the motions, because this wasn't about justice. It was about power. A man in a trucker cap near the next pump scoffed. "Damn shame," he muttered under his breath. Inside the gas station, the cashier lowered his gaze, avoiding eye contact with Marcus as he nervously pretended to check his register. The only person who looked remotely satisfied was Madeline. Her big, watery blue eyes flickered with something close to triumph as she clung to her mother's arm, pressing her face against Amanda's sleeve as though she had just escaped some monstrous fate. Marcus knew her type. Entitled, privileged, dangerous, because it wasn't just the lie itself that made her dangerous. It was the knowledge that she could lie like this and get away with it. It was the certainty that no one would question her because she was young, white, blonde, and rich. And Amanda Carter, she wasn't just protecting her daughter. She was playing the game too. "Get him in the car," Amanda ordered, her voice clipped, controlled, but laced with something venomous. The officer at Marcus's side gripped his arm, leading him toward the squad car. Marcus didn't say a word, didn't fight, didn't protest. He just walked, because this wasn't where the battle was won. The patrol car's interior smelled like stale coffee and sweat. The hard plastic seat pressed against Marcus's back as he sat with his wrists still bound, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Outside, through the narrow windshield, he could still see the gas station. He could still see Madeline and Amanda standing together, the perfect picture of a mother shielding her poor, helpless daughter from the big, scary black man. The officer in the driver's seat barely glanced at him as he pulled out of the lot. The ride to the station was silent. Marcus stared out the window, watching the city blur past in streaks of neon and shadow. A quiet storm brewed beneath the surface of his thoughts. Because tonight, he wasn't just an observer of a broken system. He was inside it, not as the man who enforced justice, but as the man it was meant to break. He had seen countless cases of wrongful arrests, had fought against police corruption, had stood in courtrooms defending people who had been torn apart by lies just like this one, and now it was happening to him. But this time, the system had made one fatal mistake. They had arrested the wrong man. They just didn't know it yet. The car slowed, turning into the station parking lot. The building loomed ahead, its harsh fluorescent lights buzzing with the same detached indifference as the officers inside. Marcus didn't need to see their faces to know what was waiting for him. Whispers, stares, the weight of assumption pressing against every breath he took. The door swung open. One of the officers yanked him out, the handcuffs rattling against his wrists. Marcus didn't resist, didn't flinch. He just moved, step by step, controlled, calculated, unshaken. And as they led him inside, he knew one thing for certain: by the time this was over, Amanda Carter was going to regret every single choice she had made tonight. The interrogation room was small, cold, and deliberately uncomfortable. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed faintly, casting a harsh glow over the dull gray walls and the single metal table bolted to the floor. Marcus sat in the stiff chair, his wrists still bound in handcuffs, his expression unreadable. He had spent years in rooms just like this, but always on the other side of the table. He had grilled suspects, confronted criminals, unraveled lies. Yet tonight, he was the one being treated like a criminal. And he knew exactly why. Not because of what had actually happened, but because of who he was versus who she was. The door swung open with a sharp creak, and Amanda Carter strode in, her uniform still crisp, her polished boots clicking against the concrete floor. She was composed, but Marcus could see it, the slight tension in her shoulders, the flicker of rage barely held in check. This wasn't just her flexing her power. This was personal. She stopped across from him, arms folded over her chest, chin lifted in smug satisfaction. "You really think you're above the law, don't you?" Marcus didn't respond. He simply watched her, his silence pressing into the room like a heavy weight. Amanda smirked, circling the table like a predator toying with its prey. "You think a fancy suit makes you different?" She continued, voice dripping with condescension. "You think people will believe your version of the story?" Marcus remained still, calm, unshaken. She wanted a reaction. She wanted him to snap, to crack, to show even a flicker of frustration so she could use it against him, but he had spent too many years mastering the art of restraint. So instead he just waited. And Amanda, she mistook his patience for weakness. She let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking her head. "See, here's the thing, Mr. Reed," she said, leaning forward, both hands pressed against the table. Marcus almost smiled. She had no idea who she was talking to. No idea what was about to happen next. Then finally he moved, slowly, deliberately, lifting his hands, still cuffed, just enough to shift his posture slightly. Amanda's gaze flickered to his hands, briefly wary as though she expected him to lunge. Instead, Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. She stiffened immediately, her hand twitching toward the baton at her hip. The officer standing by the door also tensed, stepping forward slightly. Marcus met her gaze, calm, measured. "Relax," he said smoothly. "It's just my ID." A beat of hesitation. Then Amanda gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and the officer beside her stepped forward. He reached into Marcus's pocket, fingers tightening around a small leather case before pulling it out. Then he flipped it open, and the room changed instantly. A single gold badge caught the light, its surface gleaming under the fluorescent glare. The officer's entire demeanor shifted as his eyes scanned the lettering engraved beneath the seal. His throat bobbed in a hard swallow. Amanda, still standing tall, tilted her head slightly, waiting, unimpressed. until the officer's mouth opened slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus Reed, Attorney General of Texas." Silence. Dead, suffocating silence. Amanda didn't blink, didn't speak. She just stared, the weight of those words sinking in, realization crawling across her face like a slow burning fire. For the first time tonight, she hesitated. Marcus saw it, the flicker of something beneath her anger. It wasn't just shock, it was fear. Because in an instant, everything had changed. She had spent the last few hours believing she had already won, believing that her version of the story, her daughter's well-rehearsed performance, and her own unchecked authority would be enough to bury him beneath a lie. But now, the power she wielded so effortlessly was slipping through her fingers. Marcus leaned forward slightly, just enough to close the space between them, his voice calm, deliberate, cutting through the air like a blade. "You had no idea who you were arresting tonight, did you?" Amanda's jaw tightened, her nostrils flaring slightly. But she still didn't speak, because there was nothing to say. The officer, still holding Marcus's badge, looked between them, uncertain, his grip tightening on the leather case like it might somehow protect him from the fallout. Marcus let the silence stretch, let her sit in it, let her feel the weight of the mistake she had just made. Then, finally, he spoke again. "Now." His voice was low, sharp, unwavering. "Let's try this again." Amanda exhaled sharply, her control cracking just slightly as she turned her head toward the officer beside her. Her words were tight, forced. "Unlock him." The officer hesitated only for a second before obeying. The metal cuffs clanked against the steel table as they came loose, falling away from Marcus's wrists. He rolled them once, rubbing the faint red marks left behind, then took back his badge, slipping it inside his jacket as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. Amanda knew it, and Marcus, he was just getting started. He slowly straightened in his seat, his presence in the room now immeasurably heavier than before. Then, in a tone so calm it was terrifying, he said, "I want the security footage from the gas station. And I want the dashcam footage from my vehicle pulled immediately." Amanda's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. She didn't respond, but Marcus could see the wheels turning in her mind, see the panic buried beneath her composed exterior. Because she knew what those videos would show. Madeline driving recklessly. Madeline stumbling out of her car, slurring her words. Madeline insulting him, screaming, lying, playing a role she had been taught so well. It would show that Marcus never laid a hand on her. It would show the truth. And this time, there was nothing Amanda Carter could do to rewrite it. The muscles in her jaw twitched, her gaze flickering toward the officer by the door. She was calculating, scrambling for a way out. But Marcus, he was done playing games. He stood up slowly, adjusting his suit jacket. And then, with a final glance at Amanda, he said, "Next time, Chief Carter, pick an opponent you can actually beat." And with that, he walked out of the room. The silence in the interrogation room was thick, suffocating. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly, casting a cold, sterile glow over the tense standoff. Amanda Carter's face had gone pale, her jaw clenched so tight it looked like she might crack a tooth. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. She had expected control, the ability to sweep everything under the rug, to spin the narrative the way she always had. But now she was staring at the one man she couldn't bury. Marcus Reed leaned back in his chair, composed, deliberate, completely in control. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but firm, the kind of voice that didn't ask for things but ordered them into existence. "I want every piece of security footage from the gas station and my dashcam recorded into evidence." The officers standing near the door glanced at each other, uneasy, hesitant, because now they knew. They knew who they had put in cuffs. And they knew that if they tampered with evidence against the Attorney General of Texas, It would be a career-ending move, if not worse. One of the officers, the one who had been standing closest to Amanda, cleared his throat. "I'll make sure it's retrieved, sir." Amanda's hands balled into tight fists at her sides. Marcus turned his gaze back to her. And then he delivered the final blow. "I want your badge and gun on my desk by morning." A visible twitch ran through Amanda's jaw, but Marcus wasn't done. "And I want your daughter charged with reckless endangerment, underage drinking, false reporting, and obstruction of justice." Amanda's nostrils flared. She had spent her entire career wielding power, controlling situations, controlling people, but she couldn't control this. She had spent too many years thinking she was untouchable, and now, for the first time in her life, she had lost. "You think you can ruin me?" she hissed, voice low and sharp, her control cracking. Marcus exhaled slowly, his patience thinning. "You ruined yourself." Amanda's fists clenched harder, her knuckles turning white. She wanted to fight back. She wanted to deny everything, throw her weight around, make it go away. But she couldn't. Because for once, the system she had used to protect herself was being used against her. A slow, dawning realization settled into her expression. She was cornered. There was no escaping this. Marcus stood, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket with the kind of calm, measured confidence that came with knowing he had already won. And then, in that same smooth, even tone, he said, "Next time you play this game, pick an opponent you can actually beat." Amanda said nothing. Because what could she say? There was no spinning this, no talking her way out of it. Her silence was louder than any protest. Marcus turned toward the door, and then, just before he stepped out, he paused for a brief moment, glancing over his shoulder. "Oh, and Chief Carter," she barely moved, her posture stiff. "You should tell your daughter that next time she lies about a crime, she should make sure the person she's accusing doesn't have all the evidence to prove otherwise." And then, without another word, he walked out. As Marcus stepped into the precinct hallway, the weight of what had just happened settled into his chest, not as relief, but as confirmation. This time, the truth had been enough. This time, he had walked out free. But he knew, not everyone got that chance. For every Marcus Reed who had the power to fight back, there were countless others who never got to tell their side of the story. Countless names who had been falsely accused, manipulated by a system designed to work against them. Countless names who had been erased, forgotten, buried beneath headlines that told the wrong story. He had been lucky. But justice shouldn't be about luck. It should be about truth. And as he walked out of that police station into the cool night air, he made himself a promise: this wasn't over. Because as long as people like Amanda Carter existed, as long as people like Madeline knew they could weaponize their privilege to destroy lives, there would always be another fight. And Marcus Reed, he was ready for it. If you believe in standing up for justice, like and subscribe to help us spread the truth.